Welcome back to History Otherwise, where we explore the paths not taken in history.
It's good to be back.
Today, we're looking at a moment that I think is often taken for granted as inevitable, a fixed point in the timeline we just assume had to happen, but it was actually balanced on a razor's edge.
It was. We're looking at the birth, or perhaps the non-birth, of Great Britain.
Exactly.
It's a fascinating exercise in geopolitical chaos. We tend to think of the map of this island as this single, solid thing. You've got Scotland in the north, England in the south, fused. But on a freezing January day in 1707, that unity hung by a thread.
Or, more specifically, on the resolve of a single man who, in our timeline, decided to fake a toothache to avoid a difficult vote.
The Duke of Hamilton.
Right. And today, we're going to explore what happens when that toothache, well, doesn't happen. We're doing a deep dive into the rejection of the Act of Union. I've been through the source material, parliamentary records, economic projections, military assessments, and the mission here is to map out the consequences of a no vote.
And the consequences are far bloodier and certainly more economically devastating than I think most people realize.
So here's the roadmap for this deep dive. First, we're going to look at the immediate, chaotic aftermath of the vote. The no that shocks everyone and triggers, really, an economic war. Second, we'll unpack the long-term divergence, specifically how a hard border basically destroys the Industrial Revolution before it even starts.
And finally, we'll see how a permanently fractured island changes the entire course of global history, from the American Revolution right up to World War I.
It's a story of, immediate euphoria followed by a slow, grinding reality check.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's the 16th of January, 1707, Parliament House in Edinburgh. The atmosphere described in the sources is electric.
Absolutely electric. Outside, you have mobs in the streets shouting no union, and inside, Parliament is completely split. You've got the court party pushing for the union and the country party dead set against it.
And we have to be honest about the motivations here, don't we? The court party isn't just arguing for unity out of some high-minded sense of brotherhood.
Not at all. There is a massive amount of money on the table, specifically the equivalent.
I want to drill down on this equivalent because the sources highlight it again and again. It was a sum of 398,085 millones and 10 shillings.
Which, in modern terms, is what, hundreds of millions?
Easily.
Precisely. Technically, it was compensation. England had a national debt. Scotland didn't. So if they joined, Scotland would take on a share of that debt, and England offered cash up front. But practically,
It was a bailout.
it was a bailout. The Scottish economy had been absolutely nuked by the Darien scheme.
The failed colony in Panama.
Correct. Scotland tried to build its own empire in the late 1690s. It failed catastrophically to these Spanish attacks. It wiped out about a quarter of Scotland's total liquid capital.
A quarter? That's astonishing.
So for many of the Scottish peers in that room, the equivalent wasn't a bribe. It was the only way they could avoid personal bankruptcy.
So the pressure is immense. In our real history, the leader of the opposition, James Hamilton, the Duke of Hamilton, he wavers. He stays home, claims his jaw is swelling, and the treaty passes.
But in our timeline, he shows up.
He shows up, and he finds his nerve.
He does. Instead of crumbling, he stands up and delivers the speech of his life. He argues that this money, this equivalent, cannot purchase the soul of a nation. He asks the peers if they want to be remembered as the men who sold their country to become, I think the quote is, a northern province of England.
And that kind of rhetoric matters. In a room that tense, momentum shifts. The vote is called. It's nail-bitingly close.
The sources project it would have been razor thin, 3 votes. That's his projection.
Yeah.
87 against the Union, 84-4.
A margin of 3 votes changes the world. So the treaty is dead. The mob outside goes wild, bonfires on Arthur's Seat. It feels like this massive victory for sovereignty.
But this is where the narrative pivots sharply, because the celebration is incredibly short-lived. Saying no is the easy part.
Dealing with a furious neighbor who is 10 times your size, that's the hard part.
Exactly. England isn't just going to shrug this off. From Queen Anne's government's perspective, this union wasn't about affection. It was about national security.
They were terrified of a hostile Scotland acting as a landing pad for the French.
Precisely. So when the treaty fails, they don't negotiate. They retaliate. They activate the Alien Act.
The Alien Act of 1705. This was a piece of legislation that had been held in reserve as a threat, right?
Yes, it was the stick to the carrot of the equivalent. In this timeline, by Easter 1707, it becomes law. And it is devastating. Overnight, Scots living in England are reclassified as foreign nationals. They lose the right to inherit property.
But the real killer is the trade embargo.
That's the one.
Break that down for us. What does that actually look like for the average Scot?
It looks like immediate poverty. Scottish linen, cattle, coal, all banned from English markets. That's the bulk of their export economy. So a farmer driving his cattle south to Newcastle is turned back at the border by armed guards. A linen merchant finds his cargo impounded. The Scottish economy, which was already on its knees after Darien, just completely collapses.
So the victory of independence instantly becomes a desperate struggle for survival. You've got a broke nation, a hostile neighbor, and a population that's suddenly realizing you can't eat sovereignty.
And this leads us to the next domino, the succession crisis of 1714.
Right. Queen Anne dies without an heir. In our history, because of the Union, the crown passes smoothly to her nearest Protestant relative, George of Hanover.
George III. But without the Union, Scotland has no obligation to accept a German Protestant king chosen by London.
So the union of the crowns, which had held since 1603, is severed.
It's gone. The Scottish Parliament looks at George I and says, no thank you. But they're desperate. They're broke. They need a protector, so they turn to the king over the water.
The Stuarts. James Francis Edward Stuart.
Yes. He's invited to Edinburgh. He's backed by French gold, because Louis XIV is absolutely loving this chaos, and he is crowned King James VIII of Scotland.
So let's just clarify the picture. It's 1715. We now have two kings on one small island, George I in London and James VIII in Edinburgh.
And that changes the entire geography of the island. It's no longer one unit. It's two hostile states sharing a land border.
Which brings us to part 2 of our deep dive. Forging a fortified border, because this isn't just a line on a map anymore, is it?
No, it becomes a militarized zone. Scotland, out of sheer necessity, renews the Auld Alliance with France. But we have to be clear about the power dynamics here.
This isn't a partnership of equals.
Not even close. Scotland is bankrupt. It becomes a client state of France. It's essentially a French military outpost on England's northern flank.
So the French are actually funding the Scottish government.
Entirely.
Yeah.
The payroll for the Scottish army is paid in French livres. And in return, Versailles dictates foreign policy. You see French military engineers arriving in the borders. They start rebuilding castles like Carlavarock.
And building new forts. The sources mention the Vauban style.
Yes, these new star-shaped forts to overlook the crossing points at the River Tweed. It's a hard European frontier, suddenly appearing in the middle of Britain.
And on the English side, they must be panicking.
Oh, absolutely panicking. They triple the garrison at Berwick-upon-Tweed. They expand Carlisle Castle into a massive fortress. The border becomes a hard frontier. Families that used to intermarry and trade across the Cheviot Hills are now split between enemy nations. Smuggling turns into state-sponsored espionage.
It just sounds exhausting for both sides. But what I find really fascinating in the material is how this affects the minds of the people. The notes refer to the two enlightenments.
This is one of the most tragic divergences. In our real history, the Scottish Enlightenment, thinkers like David Hume, Adam Smith, it fed directly into a British intellectual explosion. Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations while living in London. It was a universal commercial enlightenment.
But in this timeline, Scotland is stuck in survival mode.
Exactly. The Scottish Enlightenment becomes defensive, political, inward-looking. It's focused on how a small kingdom survives next to a predator. David Hume doesn't go to London. He spends his time in Paris. He becomes a critic of the English establishment, not a contributor to it.
And what about the industrial side? I was looking at the notes on the steam engine. That seems like the biggest what if here.
It's the perfect example of what is lost. In reality, the Industrial Revolution was a fusion. James Watt, a Scot, had the genius idea for the separate condenser.
Right.
But he needed Matthew Boulton, an Englishman in Birmingham, who had the capital and the manufacturing capacity to actually build it.
It was the combination of Scottish invention and English capital.
Precisely. But with a militarized border and trade embargoes, that partnership never happens. Watt's engine remains a curiosity at Glasgow University. Or maybe it's funded by the French state to pump water out of mines in Alsace.
But it doesn't meet the English capital it needs to change the world. So the Industrial Revolution is bifurcated.
It's delayed and it's distorted. England still industrializes, but it's driven by defense needs, cannons, muskets, rather than consumer goods and textiles. It's a slower, grimmer sort of progress.
A slower, more fractured progress. That leads us right into part 3. A weaker island on the world stage. Because if the island is fighting itself, it can't project power outward.
No, it can't. The Empire of One is a much, much weaker concept in the British Empire. And the first big domino to fall is the American Revolution,
1775.
1775. In real history, England faces a rebellion in the colonies. It's tough, but here is a strategic nightmare. England is fighting a war on three fronts: the colonies in America, the French globally, and now a hostile Scottish border at home.
And the Scots aren't just, sitting this one out.
Far from it. Scottish officers and privateers are actively helping the American rebels. Think of someone like John Paul Jones. He's sailing from Leith to attack English supply lines. The Royal Navy is stretched to breaking point. They can't blockade America effectively because they have to keep the Grand Fleet in the North Sea just to watch the Scottish coast.
So the outcome is?
The English war effort collapses much faster. Troops that should be in Yorktown are stuck guarding Hadrian's Wall against Scottish raids. The United States wins its independence earlier and far more decisively. England is humiliated.
And it doesn't stop there. Napoleon. The sources mention the backdoor strategy.
There was always the French dream. In 1805, instead of a battle of Trafalgar or Waterloo, the decisive clash happens on English soil, the Battle of the Cheviot Hills.
Wait, French troops actually land in Scotland?
Yes. The Auld Alliance pays off for Napoleon. He bypasses the Royal Navy, lands the Grand Army in Leith, marches south with his Scottish allies, and attacks northern England.
Good heavens.
England manages to halt them, but at a terrible cost. The country is bled white. So when the Napoleonic Wars end, England isn't the global superpower of 1815 that we know. It's an exhausted, indebted nation that barely survived an invasion.
This brings us to the composition of the empire itself. We're used to the British Empire. Without Scotland, does that empire even happen?
It happens, but it looks completely different. You have to remember, the British Empire was built on English capital, but it was often run by Scottish administrators, doctors, and soldiers. The Highland regiments were the shock troops of the empire.
Right, the thin red line.
Without them, you have a purely English empire. It's smaller, it's more commercial, less expansionist. Take India, for example. Without those Highland regiments, the mutiny of 1857 likely succeeds. English rule in India probably ends right there.
And Canada. Canada seems particularly vulnerable in this scenario.
It is. Canada was built by Scottish fur traders, Scottish railway engineers, Scottish politicians. Without that influx, the sources suggest Western Canada is simply absorbed by the United States via manifest destiny. There's no counterweight.
So we're looking at a world map that is radically different. No Canada as we know it, no British Raj. And then we get to the 20th century, World War.
This is perhaps the most terrifying part of the scenario. 1914. The lamps go out all over Europe. In our history, Britain stands as one. Here, you have England allied with France and Scotland allied with France.
But if they're both allied with France, surely they're on the same side.
They're co-belligerents, but they don't trust each other. Imagine the Western Front. You have the English army and the Scottish army. Different uniforms, different equipment, different chains of command. It's a logistical nightmare.
And the naval issue must be huge. Scapa Flow.
Huge. Scapa Flow, the anchorage in the Orkney Islands, was vital for blockading Germany. In this timeline, that is a foreign port. The Royal Navy can't just use it.
They'd have to negotiate for it.
And maybe the Scots say no to assert their neutrality. Maybe there are German spies in Edinburgh. It complicates the entire war effort. The blockade of Germany is weaker, the war drags on, and on the home front, England has conscription, Scotland doesn't. The resentment would be off the charts.
It paints a picture of a grim, fractured reality. Let's fast forward to the present day in this timeline. Let's say we're taking a train from London to Edinburgh.
Well, first, you'd need your passport. You'd stop at Berwick-upon-Tweed for customs. You'd have to change your currency from English pounds to Scottish pounds.
And culturally, would they just be two versions of the same thing?
Very different, I think. There's no shared National Health Service, no shared BBC. Scotland is likely a member of a European federation, very integrated with the continent, perhaps using the euro, while England remains more insular, more Atlantic-facing. The political alignments are completely out of sync.
It really highlights the central paradox of this whole deep dive. We started with the idea of the Union being rejected to save Scottish sovereignty, to stop the nation being bought and sold for that £400,000 equivalent.
And that is the tragedy. By trying to preserve absolute independence, both nations ultimately lost their potential.
How so? Can you summarize the scorecard for us?
Well, England lost its strategic depth. It lost the security of its own island, which meant it could never project power globally in the same way. It never becomes the superpower that shapes the modern world.
And Scotland?
Scotland kept its parliament, yes. But it lost access to the world's largest market. It became a minor client state of France, perpetually broke, its politics defined by the need for a foreign protector. It traded a union with London for, really, subservience to Paris.
So the Empire of One is weak, and the independent kingdom is dependent.
Exactly. The irony is that the Union of 1707, as messy, as unpopular, as corrupt as it was a pragmatic necessity. It combined the strengths of both to create something far greater than the sum of its parts. By failing to unite, the island missed the chance to become the world-shaping force it became in our reality.
Because history might have turned otherwise. It really makes you think about the nature of political compromise. We often view compromise as a weakness or a betrayal of principles.
But sometimes, those messy compromises are the only things holding the roof up. And sometimes, the path to greatness requires giving up a little bit of yourself to be part of something bigger.
That's a perfect place to leave it. Thank you for guiding us through this fractured Britain.
My pleasure.
And for you listening, think about that the next time you see a messy political deal being cut. It might just be the thing that saves the future. We'll be back next time with another exploration of the history that almost was.